The name's Rex. But you'll call me Captain or Sir. War does not come with a guarantee. No soldier gets the promise of safety.
My designation is Trooper 27-5555, sir.
We call him Fives. I'm Heavy.
This is Echo.
I'm Commander Cody, your new boss.
Sir, yes, sir!
Looks like we got ourselves a batch of shinies, Commander. Look around. We're one and the same. Same heart, same blood. Your training is in your blood. And my blood's boiling for a fight.
This is our home. Any idea what
This
you've done?
is our war.
This can't be good. We need to pull back. Get them to follow us. If we can draw them out, we can see them. If we can see them, we can hit them.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Republic Outpost Radio. I am your host, Sean Hussey, and this is our MediaByte Star Wars podcast, per usual. And my co-host is here again, Nathan Hicks. What's up, Nate?
Hi, how you doing?
Awesome. So, we've been talking a lot about the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, Star Wars, everything except the prequels the last couple weeks. And now that we're here on our fourth episode, it's about time that we start covering my personal favorite era of Star Wars and something that I know Nate holds near and dear to his heart as well. And we thought, what not a better way to start talking about the prequel trilogy than to discuss the Phantom Menace, the movie that started it all. We're just going to kind of break down different parts of the film, talk about some of the fan expectations and what ended up the result being, things we like about the movie, some minor things we don't like. We're going to try to stay mostly positive on this one. We just want to kind of break down what we appreciate about the film, because we know that there's a lot of Star Wars fans, myself included, who really don't have a lot of issues with this film and actually really enjoy it. So, Nate, I think that, the really easy way to start off this discussion is looking at the hype for this movie versus ultimately what the reception and final product were. And I think that the easiest way to start with that is just understanding context. And I think that everyone at this point kind of understands the context. But Star Wars had been out of theaters for, 16, 17 odd years at that point. And George Lucas promised a new sort of spectacle in CGI, something that had never been done before, which he did deliver on. And people were really excited to see Star Wars again. And a lot of the material that had been released between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace was all post-Return of the Jedi, things like the Thrawn trilogy and such. And this was kind of the first content that we were getting that was pre-A New Hope. So fans were really excited to see what that would entail, and the trailers were really promising. Ultimately, a lot of fans walked away disappointed, although after a while, they started to kind of understand that the film was better than they probably originally gave it credit for. So, Nate, I'll hand it over to you. Let's talk a little bit about your experiences with The Phantom Menace. Did you see this one in theaters?
I did. This was the first Star Wars movie I got to see in theaters. I was 9 years old. And to kind of start off, I don't really remember a whole lot of hype from the time, but I've got, kind of a really personal story about the Phantom Menace and being 9 and seeing this movie in theaters. So, essentially, I grew up watching the original trilogy with my dad, every couple weeks. We were always watching Star Wars. At least that was one of the few movies he would let me watch with him as a little kid. I wasn't allowed to watch Terminator 2 or nothing like that, but I grew up watching the original trilogy, so, of course, hearing more Star Wars is coming out when I was 9, I was like, oh, cool, more lightsabers, hell yeah. So, my dad took me and we met up with my uncle and my cousin, and the four of us went and saw the Phantom Menace together. And I don't remember a whole lot about seeing it in the theater. I mostly kind of remember just hanging out by the cars after, and my dad and my uncle discussing the movie. And the thing for me was, my dad passed away like a year or so after this came out, so this was his last Star Wars movie. And then, years later, I'm watching the movie Fanboys, which I don't know if you've seen. Hopefully some of our listeners have. About a group of friends breaking into Skywalker Ranch so their buddy who's dying of cancer can see the Phantom Menace before he passes away. And, that movie was, it's near and dear to me because, that was basically what happened to my dad. I mean, we didn't break into Skywalker Ranch, but we got to see the movie. He got to see it before he passed away. So this is a really important movie for me. And I'm a bit emotionally biased towards really loving this movie for that reason alone. But yeah, I mean, going back to the hype, I don't remember a whole lot, but it definitely was pretty awesome. Claiming that I saw it in theaters.
Yeah, I'm gonna be straight. This movie came out before I was born, so I'm a youngin'. Did not see this one in theaters. That's actually not true. Oh my gosh, I just remembered. Phantom Menace re-released in 3D. They were trying to do that before Disney acquired Lucasfilm. They were going to re-release all the Star Wars movies in 3D, and the only one that ever got released was the Phantom Menace. So I actually have seen the Phantom Menace in theaters, just not in 1999. So yeah, I mean, obviously there was a lot of hype around this movie, and fans really walked out disappointed. I think that a lot of people have since come around on it, but I think that the easiest way to transition is just the reason that fans were so disappointed was just because about how skewed this movie was towards kids. And I mean, George Lucas talks about this all the time. There's a great, not really documentary, but like behind the scenes video. It's like 2 hours long about the making of the Phantom Menace, which is something that I've now watched. It's on YouTube for anybody who's interested. I highly recommend going to check it out. You can watch the whole thing. It's really just phenomenal work. It really goes into just the ideas behind it and how they were able to develop the technology and the sets and everything like that. Really just something special. But anyway, George Lucas has always talked about how Star Wars is intended for kids. And I think that the original trilogy, at least on the surface going into the Phantom Menace, it was darker than the Phantom Menace, you could say. Obviously, as Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith came out, the prequel trilogy became darker than the original trilogy. But at the time, the original trilogy was darker in a sense than the Phantom Menace, and a lot of that has to do with Jar Jar and some of the silliness of the CGI. But we don't want to jump on Jar Jar too much. I mean, that's just a hot debate in a way, something that's talked about all the time. Personally, I understand him for what he is. I don't have a problem with him. I don't think he's annoying. I don't love him either, but he's part of Star Wars, and I will always appreciate that aspect of him. Nate,
Yeah, I mean, I don't love or hate Jar Jar. I just find him unnecessary, with the exception of one scene. Him leading Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to the Gungan City, which in turn gets them a ship to go to wherever the Queen is. I don't remember the name of that city, but I post that. I feel like you could take Jar Jar out of the movie completely and it doesn't really change anything. So I'm not really, I don't know. He's just not necessary. I don't care that he's there, but I don't care that he's not either. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot to get into on Jar Jar. You kind of love him or you don't. And there's definitely a lot of people, especially of my generation, that really love Jar Jar. As I said, I'm not the biggest fan, but I also don't really dislike him in any way. So we could talk just a little bit about overall just the reception of the movie before we kind of get into the actual material of the film. I was blessed enough to go to Star Wars Celebration this year in Chicago, which was really great, and I was able to watch the 20th anniversary Phantom Menace panel live. For those of you who don't know, the Phantom Menace turns 20 this year. Turned 20 a couple weeks ago, I believe.
Yep.
In May. But it was a great panel. We were really hoping that somebody special, somebody secretive would have showed up other than the announced guests. That did not happen. However, they had Ian McDermott was there, Ahmed Best was there, Doug Chang, a lot of the behind-the-scenes people. Matthew Wood was there, big sound designer and voice of General Grievous and the battle droids. And they just talked a lot about the experience of working on this film and what George was looking for and the amount of effort and time that went into the film. And of course, with every film, good or bad, there's a lot of people putting a lot of work into it. As somebody who's a film major, I appreciate every type of film and the work that goes into it. But I think with the Phantom Menace, in some ways, it's just on another level. They talk about what they were doing technologically and what they were doing from a production standpoint and designing and everything that they were trying to do with the film. It really is just something special when you look at it from that way. And although some people don't like the story and don't like how it came out and don't even like the prequel trilogy, I think it's hard to look at the prequel trilogy as a whole, and especially the Phantom Menace at its time, and not appreciate the work and the dedication and the revolutionary aspects of it and what it was able to achieve for its time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, other than George Lucas playing with, remastering the original trilogy, I mean, this was a pretty big deal for CGI in general. The CGI work on especially the Phantom Menace is just incredible, especially for its time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what they were able to do. I mean, again, watch the documentary. They went so deep into what they were able to do. There's this really, I don't want to call it iconic scene in a sense, but there's just this really great image that I think fans of the saga have seen where they did the storyboarding for the Phantom Menace and George had the entire movie storyboarded. And he went over it with 3 highlighters, and one of them was practical stuff, one of them was CGI stuff, and then one of them was sets that need to be built. And the amount that he went over in CGI had just never been done before. And John Knoll, I believe his name is, who was a big Lucasfilm partner and someone who worked in ILM and was big in the computer generated stuff of that time, but also is the co-creator of Adobe Photoshop. So graphic designers and people like that, you have John Knoll to thank for that. But he would talk about how George was just coloring in all these scenes and how he had never seen so much CGI needed before. And he was like, how are we going to do this? And they actually had to build the technology to be able to produce that kind of stuff. We could talk technical all day, though, Nate. Let's get into the meat of the actual film. Why don't we start with, I think, what everybody's maybe favorite part of the film is, other than the end battle, and that's the pod racing. I'm a fan of pod racing. It's okay. I think it's a really cool sequence. As a tech geek, I really love the sound design. Again, Matthew Wood, great dude. There's a lot of that in the documentary as well. Saw some of that at the panel. But honestly, Nate, I'm going to hand this one to you. I think pod racing is way more up your alley. So take it away.
Dude, the pod racing scene is so good. You got these things with 2 giant engines held on with cables with electricity shooting between them, and they go really, really fast. Through canyons and shit. It's awesome. There's a lot, just the different designs of the pod racers. I mean, the variety is really cool. We got that cool bit where they're are coming out of the canyon, and the Tusken Raiders are all geared up on the hill, sniping them out. That was a cool little throwback to A New Hope, seeing them again, the Sand People. That whole segment is just action-packed. I mean, it's a race. Races are fun to watch. And it was great. I mean, I love it. For me, it was the first really big, exciting part of the movie. The stakes were high. The stakes were very high at that point. And the payoff, I think, was just well worth it. That whole section is so good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I got to watch the Phantom Menace actually after that panel on the plane ride home. So I just went to the panel and then I was able to watch the film like a few hours later, and that was in the middle of April. So that's just really just has helped the experience for me. The pod racing sequence, I think, is just really special. Not only technologically revolutionary, but just also from a story standpoint and from a filmmaking standpoint. It's just a great sequence, and I think that you kind of wrapped that up perfectly. I'm going to transition a little bit to the politics, because this is probably something people hate the most about the Phantom Menace. But for me, something that I actually really like, I mean, obviously, when we're talking about Star Wars, it's something that people want to see action, they want to see heroes, and they want to see this fantasy story. And I understand the complaints about the politics, but when you look at it as an overall story, especially now where we're going with Episode 9 and Palpatine, to see where he got his beginnings through the politics, I think is just great. And I think that if you really sit down and pay attention to what's happening, I think that you can really understand it and appreciate it more. I think often a lot of people just get bored with the politics and kind of tune them out, and like on the surface understand what's going on, but not really kind of dive in and appreciate the level of storytelling that Lucas is doing here. He's essentially, although mirroring it off of real world events, he's essentially building a galactic Senate and political structure and like just years and years of history within a few lines of dialogue. Which I've always found really impressive, the world building of Star Wars. Lucas has always done a great job of that. But when you look at what they set up right from the beginning about the Trade Federation and the blockades around Naboo, and the Chancellor Valorum is in his inability to support Naboo and really debate the Trade Federation and the corporate, the CIS. I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
I don't remember either.
But it's something independent systems. I don't remember what the C stands for. Anyway, but just like his inability to help Naboo, and then on the flip side, Palpatine's using the Trade Federation to capture Naboo, his homeworld, so that he can push Valorum out of power, and then they call for an emergency vote, and then Palpatine gets elected Chancellor. And then ultimately we'll talk sometime eventually about Attack of the Clones and how he uses Jar Jar and more political structure for the Senate to give him emergency powers, which gives him even more power during his reign. But the political stuff in The Phantom Menace is just so important because it's the foundation of what becomes Palpatine's character. Now you can look at other things like the Dark Plagueis book, which is now Legends, to see more of Palpatine's Sith history. Which a lot of that I'm sure is still canon to an extent, although not confirmed by the Lucasfilm story group. But in canon at least, The Phantom Menace is kind of our first introduction to Palpatine and what he's doing on a political level to gain power in the fundamentals of the Empire and what he's trying to build from an early stage, because it's not long after The Phantom Menace that he gets the clone army underway. With the help of Sifo Dyas, which is like a whole other story. But, I mean, Nate, what do you think about politics in Star Wars? Like, are you a fan? Are you not a fan?
When I was younger, I had a hard time understanding what was going on, and I didn't really like it. But now that I'm older, like, I can definitely see and appreciate the subtleties and the importance of the dialogue surrounding the political aspects of the Republic and Palpatine. It is in a way subtle, and you really do have to pay attention to the dialogue to really get what's going on. But it's the fact that so much is explained, I guess you could say, through that little bit of dialogue is incredible. I mean, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on there that you won't catch unless you're really paying attention to it, and I think that's something that I really like. It's something I really like about the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's something even as a kid, I was like, I look around the Senate room in the Senate chamber, and you see all the aliens and all the different species. And it's kind of, in a sense, Lucas's, prequel cantina. Like, you look around the room and there are so many new types of aliens. I mean, E.T. is in there.
Yep.
That's more of an Easter egg. But, like, there are just so many different type of creatures that are introduced. I mean, you've got the Nemoidians, I think that's how you say it, the, like, Newt Gunray. Yep. There's just so, I mean, I'm trying to think of the Gungans, of course, are introduced amongst a bunch of other smaller creatures. But you've got so much being added in the world building. I mean, how can we not talk about Coruscant? Just beautiful. Coruscant's my favorite Star Wars planet by far. The stuff that they're able to do with that planet, and just even have developed that in Clone Wars and in Attack of the Clones and even Revenge of the Sith. It's just this really beautiful central location for this story. And we could talk a little bit about Naboo as we move along, but I think it's hard not to break down that beginning or that middle section there after they've left Tatooine and when they're on Coruscant. It's just the beauty of that planet, from its exterior to the city to the outskirts of the city, which I don't think we see until Attack of the Clones. But that's still a really cool concept as well. We haven't even talked about characters. I mean, we can move along to the plot of Naboo after, as we kind of progress through the movie. Let's talk about some characters. I mean, obviously we've got Obi-Wan, we've got Anakin. But if we're on the Phantom Menace, I mean, we got to talk about Qui-Gon, Nate.
Have to talk about Qui-Gon.
You go ahead. You start us off with Qui-Gon.
Qui-Gon, man. I mean, the dude was like, yo, hey, masters, I have the chosen one. I mean, he was all about it. I think Obi-Wan's line to him about, if he would stop and would listen, to the Jedi Council, he'd be on the council. But I guess Obi-Wan's saying he's like a bit hard-headed. You kind of don't get a real deep. I feel like you kind of don't get a real deep sense of his character, other than the way he acts with Anakin. I feel like when he's with Obi-Wan, he's very stoic and reserved, but with Anakin, you get to see a lot of like little subtle emotion with him, where you can tell that he like really cares about Anakin, and I think that's really interesting. And Obi-Wan saying that he's essentially stubborn. There's a little bit to really dive into with his character. There's more in Legends, I believe. I have done a little bit of research on that a long time ago, but he's got a very crazy history, that Qui-Gon. Overall, he's a badass Jedi. I mean, he's awesome. I don't really know what else to describe. I mean, he's one of the first people to duel a Sith in, I guess they say in the movie, like thousands of years or some shit, when they get ambushed by Darth Maul. And that little scene right there is awesome. The fact that Qui-Gon was able to like keep his cool in the face of what he was like, okay, this has got to be a Sith, kept his cool, and was able to make sure, A, he got Anakin out, B, the ship's going, hold him off, boom, we're out of here. Like that quick little 30 seconds, man, awesome.
Yeah, I think I'm a little spoiled because, I mean, I saw the original trilogy first, but there was definitely like a shock in the theater, I'm sure, in the 90s when that first lightsaber action happened, because it was unlike any other lightsaber combat we'd ever seen. I don't remember my reaction to that combat, that first scene. Obviously, we can get into Duel of the Fates and the final battle towards the end. But no, Qui-Gon as a character is just fascinating. Not only just because of his difference in views from the Jedi Order, just how he behaves, how he approaches problems, especially when you add in the consideration that he's an apprentice of Dooku, and Yoda to some extent, and then master to Obi-Wan. Claudia Gray's new book, Master and Apprentice, dives into Qui-Gon a lot more as well. I haven't gotten the chance to read that yet. But I mean, even his approach to Shmi and Anakin on Tatooine, just his very wise manner. I think that Qui-Gon, above all else in the Clone Wars, or in the prequel trilogy as well, just represents the Jedi of old and what a Jedi is supposed to be, and what the Jedi were striving to be. I think that all the Jedi during the prequel era were beginning to fall, but you're talking 10 years prior to the beginning of the Clone Wars. So the Jedi still had not yet really fallen into this general state of war. But Qui-Gon sort of embodied what Jedi should be. And even you could see that characters like Yoda, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan, and Anakin even, although Anakin had not really started his Force training yet, were caught up in this world as if war was coming. And Qui-Gon really just stuck to his ways of old. And I think out of all of the 9 movies now, I'd like to see what we get in the Old Republic. But out of the 9 movies, Qui-Gon probably embodies the best of what a Jedi should be. Maybe Yoda in the original trilogy kind of came back to those messages, but not Yoda in the prequels. But definitely Qui-Gon was this kind of stoic, prime Jedi example for not only Obi-Wan but also Anakin.
I think I should have had you lead on Qui-Gon.
No, you got the badass part. I got the meditation and cool part.
The one thing I really wanted to get across, and I couldn't put words to it until after what you said, was with Qui-Gon, you really see his love for, I want to say humanity, but it's not humanity because there's way more than just humans out there. Like his love for just people in general, and his wanting to be the protector and peacekeeper, and he wants to help. He wants to free the slaves. He just knows he can't, and I think that's really cool. You don't really see that with the other Jedi in the movies.
No, you definitely don't. Oh, yeah, I mean, not at all. Especially after Attack of the Clones, the Jedi have now fallen into this kind of war state, which ultimately leads to their collapse, which would be a great concept for an episode. Write that down. Just talking about the Jedi and their collapse during the prequel trilogy and how they fell and kind of opened the door for Palpatine to corrupt their system. But no, I mean, we talked a lot about Qui-Gon. Obviously, Obi-Wan and Anakin are big parts of the prequel trilogy. I don't think that we need to discuss them too much when talking about the Phantom Menace. But why don't we switch gears a little bit to Naboo?
Sorry, I was writing down that note.
It's okay. We could switch gears maybe over to Naboo, kind of moving along in the plot.
Yes, I do love some Naboo. I think it might be, in my opinion, the most beautiful planet we see in the Star Wars films.
Okay, I'll give you that for now. Keep going.
It's a hot take.
Take it for now. Keep going.
So, the architecture that we do get to see in, I guess, the capital city of Naboo is really awesome. That's something that always struck me was all the archways, and I think there's like a bunch of domes and stuff, and it's just big and grand, a beautiful city. We get to see, a lot of water. I mean, it's essentially like an Earth clone, but it's way prettier. I don't know why or how, but it's just way prettier. The fields with the Gungans battling the droids, like the oceans. We get to see a cool shot of a waterfall when Anakin's flying out in that starfighter. Like, it's a beautiful planet. And the Gungan city's really cool looking too. Bunch of little domes underneath the waves. But overall, the planet I think is beautiful. It's an awesome planet, and setting up the setting up the climax of the movie to be there, I think was a really good move, where you see a lot of essentially violence on top of the beauty of the planet. It's really cool.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. I was trying to think of a more beautiful Star Wars planet while you were talking, and honestly, I couldn't at the time. Probably something outside of the films. But out of the 9 films, you probably win on that one. I don't know. Kamino's too stormy. Anyway, that's a different discussion. No, I really like the setting of Naboo. I think that making it so close to Earth in like its biome and its design, in a sense, kind of modeling after these like Spanish architectures, Spanish and Italian architectures. I know there's a place that they shot in Attack of the Clones. I can't remember where it is. I thought it was in Spain, but I might be wrong. Because there's a location where you can like hold up a picture and it's the same spot where Anakin and Padme are walking. But anyway,
I'm pretty sure I saw a Reddit post about that like yesterday.
Yeah, it's a great setting. I think that it makes the story more real. I think that making it like this human crisis story for the Naboo residents, and just like this sort of like kidnapping, hostile takeover situation makes the whole story more empathetic and sympathetic. Something that I think that Star Wars kind of needed, maybe for the time that it came out. I think that a lot of what you related to in the original trilogy was the character motivations and their backgrounds, whereas what you're relating to in the prequel trilogies are the experiences they're going through, in a sense. And I think that's a good way to kind of relate those two topics. Do you want to move on to like some battle stuff? Maybe like Naboo battle? I know you talked about just the city. We could talk about the Gungan battle.
Yeah.
Kind of the scale of that. Or is there something you wanted to go back on?
No, with the Gungan battle, I mean, we do learn that the Gungans had to abandon their city, which, you know, what Qui-Gon told Boss, what's his name? Boss something, the leader of the Gungans.
Nass.
Yeah, Boss Nass. So, you know, Qui-Gon had told him, or Obi-Wan, I guess it was actually, basically told him that, you know, once the humans in the city falls, you know, the Gungan cities are going to fall too, and we learned that does happen. And they go and they find Boss Nass and all the other Gungans basically hidden away in what they call their sacred place. And that's where they come up with this. I mean, that's where essentially they create the treaty and plan, you know, the rest of the movie, essentially, which leads into the big Gungan battle, which, I mean, we got to see some cool stuff there. The giant shield that the Gungans, you know, have. They got this giant elephant-looking creature thing. They look like giant. What do you call them? I don't even know, man. Just giant creatures with the big packs on their back that shoot up the big shield, and then they all connect, and they just giant dome over them. And then, you know, you're seeing that. You're like, oh, that's cool. And then you're seeing all these like droid ships coming up. You see them open up, and just the lines and lines of all those battle droids coming out, and you're just like, holy crap. I mean, that just seeing both sides, you know, come up to that starting line right there and just face off against each other. It's pretty tense. It was pretty awesome. So it's a really cool battle sequence. Definitely not the best of the prequels, but still very different in its own right. Especially since it's very reminiscent to like the Ewoks versus the Empire, just in the sense of like these creatures defending their home, these kind of subordinate creatures who can fight this droid army, and ultimately they would have lost had it not been for Anakin in space. But we'll kind of hit on all parts of the final battle as we go through here. I think we'll save the best for last, but I think that the Gungan battle... Would you think that Gungan battle, the scale of it, do you think that's bigger than the battle on Hoth?
I mean, the scale is bigger.
It's probably the biggest battle we'd seen in Star Wars up to that time, I'd say.
It's tough, because, like, I would say it's the biggest ground battle.
Yes.
I think the battle above Endor is the biggest scale battle. we've seen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But ground battle, I definitely think Naboo is probably the biggest.
Yeah,
that
no,
was
I
on
would
two
agree with
fronts
that.
as well, if you think about it.
Oh yeah. Well, really like 4 fronts.
Yeah.
There's like really 4 different battles going on, which is something that Lucas carried throughout the prequel trilogy, which not great, but we can talk about that another time. But no, I mean, there's a lot to be said about the Gungan battle. I really like that whole entire sequence. Why don't we switch over to Padme and Captain Panaka and the throne room taking sequence?
Oh man, yeah, that's
probably
right,
the most boring out of the 4. But
you say that that's actually my favorite part of the whole of all the well. Not my favorite. You know what my favorite is.
I was going to say,
we'll
you can't.
That.
Okay, we'll get to your favorite.
So my second favorite is them, essentially, the fight to retake the throne room. And I love that. I love just the idea of this small force infiltrating this city that's been taken away from them. They get in, and, the first thing they do is they free the pilots. And they're like, yo, go kick some ass in space. We got this. This small force just breaks in, free the pilots. The pilots are out. They're like, yo, all right, let's go do some stuff up in space. And then they're like, all right, here's the deal. We got to get back to the throne room. Let's go. I can kind of see how it might be a little boring, but I wish we would have got more of it, like the fighting through the hallways of, I guess, what is essentially, well, I mean, what would you call it? They're like giant home building. Like,
the
I
palace.
wanted to see, their palace. Jeez, man. I mean, really?
It's okay.
Really tonight?
Yeah, I think
want
there's
more
some
of
cool
it.
stuff going on there. I think you've got when they go out the windows, that's really sick, and they like escalate go up the side of the building.
Like, that part's cool, but like, can we get some more like shooting and fighting their way like upstairs and like down hallways?
I mean, there's definitely more to that, but like, you have to consider when you're talking about Star Wars here. That's not the focus. Any action movie can kind of do that. Lucas wants to go and be above and beyond from that. But no, I mean, I like that whole sequence. I like Captain Panaka as a character.
Yes.
Especially when you read up. Apparently he like joins the Empire and shit. In canon, he's got a really crazy story. Check that out on Wikipedia. But no, I mean, we haven't even talked about Padme. Because to be fair, although she plays a pretty pivotal role in this movie, but her character arc and what's going on with her character is kind of all over the place. It's kind of hard to nail down what's going on and to talk about it in like a concise way. But I think we'd both agree Natalie Portman was a very talented young actress, still is a very, great actress now. But she really killed that role, and I think the reason we're not talking about her is just because everyone kind of universally understands just how good she was as Queen Amidala and what she did in that role and what she ended up doing throughout the entire prequel trilogy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the only thing else we should mention about her is the costume design. Her costumes were outrageous. They were awesome. But, I don't know a whole lot about costuming. She had a lot going on, and it was very cool and very interesting.
Oh, yeah. Costumes were something else. So, yeah, kind of recovering. We'll move over to the space battle, talk a little bit about that. So, probably the most silly part of the whole film. Anakin going up there. I don't have a problem with it. It's a little silly. Other than that, like I don't have a lot of thought on the space battle. I think it's cool. I think the CGI is kind of weak in that section. But overall, I mean, it's fun. It's space. It's shooting.
Yeah, we see some cool stuff there. To backtrack a tiny bit, the actor who played Anakin, I mean, I can't fault him. He was a kid.
Oh yeah, Jake Lloyd
as far
was
as I'm
having a blast.
concerned. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, he was having fun and he did what he was told to do. So, but yeah, I mean, some of that's silly, but we see some really cool space battle stuff going on there, and That's never not cool, unless it totally sucks. But this doesn't totally suck. So yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I think we've been kind of beating around the bush. Let's talk about Duel of the Fates.
Oh my God, yes.
I mean, I just did a whole breakdown on Darth Maul a couple weeks ago on the site. So why don't you kick this one off?
Seeing those doors open, and then he's just standing there, and then you got Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan stepping forward, like, yo, we got this, That music kicking in, Darth Maul doing his little flourish, right? And then he turns on the lightsaber, and then the second blade comes out, and then you're just like, oh, this guy means business. This guy is about to tear them up. So good. Just that oh, yeah. I could watch that over and over and then get to the actual good stuff after that. Man, I love that part so much.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's so good. There's just a lot of character stuff going on there. It's kind of actually funny to talk about it now because I'm like, yeah, it was cool, but like what it creates as a result is far more entertaining to talk about. Just
True.
the arc that Obi-Wan and Maul go through, the ramifications of Qui-Gon's death. I mean, it's just the battle itself is very cool. Yes, we see a lot of cool lightsaber tricks. Ray Park is amazing. And it's just a very cool action sequence, but like it's hard not to think of Duel of the Fates now and just think about everything that comes after, because personally for me that stuff is just way more interesting. And I definitely love the piece. It's a great ending to this film. It definitely redeems it for a lot of people. I think that it just helps the film end on a high note. The death of Qui-Gon is something that, and the death of Darth Maul, I guess, to an extent, are things that people argue about all the time if they were the right decisions or not. I think Qui-Gon was, and I think we ultimately learned that the death of Darth Maul was a bad decision because George Lucas reversed the decision anyway in Clone Wars. Check out my article for more information on that. I'll link that in the description as well. But I mean, it's a great lightsaber battle. The choreography is great. I don't think we've seen anything quite like it in Star Wars since.
That was definitely a first, a battle that prolonged.
Oh God, yeah.
And just the athleticism of everyone during that fight. I mean, that I remember. I sometimes, man, when I go back and I watch that movie, I'm still like, this is the best lightsaber fight in all of them. Like, I don't care. Of course, I always change my mind later, but every time I watch it, I'm like, yeah, you can't beat this. It's too good.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, and the funny thing about it is, like, you look at the prequels as a whole, and they're really choreographed fights. And, like, I love them, and fans love them. But I never want to see anything like that in Star Wars again. I really like the way the sequel trilogy does it.
Yeah.
But that we could talk about lightsaber fights another time, too. Just overall, though, I mean, we're kind of coming up on our time watch anyway. Good film, not great. You could argue whether or not it's the worst of the 9 or now the 11, I guess. I love it. I love all of Star Wars anyway. I'm kind of hard to have these negative conversations with because there's not much in Star Wars that I just really don't like. I really appreciate all of it and love all of it. It's just the type of Star Wars fan that I am. Closing thoughts on the Phantom Menace, Nate?
It's emotionally it means a lot to me. I definitely have it higher on my rankings than I think most other people do. We had the original trilogy beforehand, but don't think about that. Think about that this is the first story, in the timeline of Star Wars that we get. it's a good introduction, because you're seeing these things happening throughout the film, and then you get to the battle for Naboo, and the Duel of the Fates, and the ramifications of the climax of this movie. Essentially kickstart everything else. And that was its intent. That's what was intended, but like just to see it really play out, and then later on get to see the cause of what the effects of everything. I think that alone just makes it a solid, great film.
Yeah, it's so I love all of Star Wars. So I mean, I think that kind of does it for this overall discussion. I mean, we talked a little bit. We did talk a lot about the music, but the music is great. Gotta love John Williams. We talked a lot about Duel of the Fates, which is of course the song that goes along with the Duel of the Fates. And the Death of Qui-Gon is another song as well. I don't know what we're gonna do going forward with the prequels. I don't know if we're gonna break down each movie quite like this. Just because we really wanted to talk about this film during its 20th anniversary run. It's just something the two of us felt really strongly about, something we wanted to discuss, which is, of course, the whole point of this podcast, is for us to kind of talk about things that we like in Star Wars and things that we can kind of have just like these really calm and open discussions about. I just like that kind of mindset for the podcast. So if you have any last thoughts, Nate, if not, I'm going to wrap it all up.
I think we're good to wrap it up.
Awesome. Okay, so that does it for this episode 4 of Republic Outpost Radio. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, we're still looking for questions and stuff. If you guys want to ask us questions, tweet us, #Republic Outpost Radio, or leave a comment on this video. Make sure to like, subscribe to the MediaByte HQ. Check out our website, themediabyte.com. We post daily editorials, and we're going to try to get back into some news sharing again, so you can find some of your latest news there. Also follow our Twitter if you want to catch up on news. We post news there regardless. We have Star Wars editorials, DC Marvel editorials, and a little heads up today, Friday, we posted a Dark Souls 3 editorial, so we're kind of branching out into different areas of content as well, so make sure to check all of that out. As for social media platforms, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at RealSeanHussey. Make sure to also follow the MediaByte on Twitter, Instagram, and we're on Facebook now. We got a Facebook admin, so make sure to follow us there as well, all at the MediaByte. Nate, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Drunken Dragon with a 3 and a 0 in its respective place. Replacing the letters that look like a 3 and a 0. So yeah, it's the best place to get at me right now.
Absolutely. And again, guys, once again, thank you so much for listening. Check in next week for another episode of the podcast. And until then, may the Force be with you.